ESS Ecosystems and Ecology 1, Part 3, looks at ecological pyramids as models of food chains and food webs. The significant ideas are the interaction of species with their environment result in energy and nutrient flows, and that the feeding relationships of species in a system can be modeled using food chains, food webs, and ecological pyramids. Here's an outline of the ecosystem and ecology units. There are two distinct units, Ecosystems and Ecology 1, Ecosystems and Ecology 2. This movie is focused here. Here are the first two IB syllabus statements to start this movie. State that ecological pyramids include pyramids of numbers, biomass, and productivity, and that they are quantitative models. Explain the principles underlying the pyramids of numbers, biomass, and productivity, and be able to construct them from given data. It's important to realize that feeding relationships involve producers, consumers, and decomposers. These can be modeled using ecological pyramids. In this diagram of energy flow through a food chain, we can see the transformation of energy from a high-quality, ordered form, solar energy and food, to a low-quality form with high entropy, and that's heat. And heat is transferred out of the system to the universe. And there's the second law of thermodynamics. Whenever energy is transformed, some of it proceeds to a less ordered form, and we would call that heat. Now, there's equal in and equal out. That's the first law. Energy can be transformed, but not created or destroyed. As a note, all organisms use high-quality energy inputs to maintain their own order, to maintain their state of being alive. Organisms use high-quality, ordered forms of energy and transform those forms of energy to low-quality, less ordered forms. Here's an ecological pyramid, a productivity pyramid, because it models the flow of energy in gram or joules units through the trophic levels. And the size or magnitude of each level represents the rate at which that storage is being generated. Productivity pyramids have rate units. The base of the pyramid represents producers. The entire storage is GPP, gross primary production, the total photosynthetic transformation of solar energy into the organic matter in plants. Then the producers use some of their own energy for their own needs. That's respiration. And net primary productivity is what's left over after respiratory release of heat to the universe. NPP is the energy available to the next trophic level up. Now, primary consumers take this much. Gross secondary production. Respiration and feces represent a loss of energy from the system, leaving net secondary production. Net secondary production is the energy available to the next trophic level, and so forth. Notice how the pyramid displays a decline in available energy along the food chain up the trophic levels. With each trophic level, high-quality energy is being transformed to low-quality, less ordered heat. So available energy always declines through the food chain. Lastly, notice that while net primary production represents what's available to the next trophic level, the primary consumers did not take all of what was available to them. What becomes of this part of NPP? Well, some could go to decomposers. Consider what happens to leaves that fall to the ground, and some would allow the producer community to grow to become larger. So here are two IB syllabus statements that dig into some detail, but I've already presented enough information for you to be comfortable with them. Explain the tendency for numbers, biomass, and available energy to decrease along food chains. State that productivity pyramids represent flows and are measured in rate units. State that biomass pyramids represent a standing stock, fixed point in time measurement, and are measured in mass per area units or energy per area units. This last statement is something I've not yet covered. Stay tuned, it's around the corner. Again, here's an ecological pyramid of productivity representing the flow of energy through the trophic levels, and each level represents the rate, notice the units, at which the storage is being generated. Net primary productivity forms the base of the entire food chain. Nearly all food chains begin with photosynthesizers, producers. Notice the progressive decline in available energy. The organisms at each trophic level use energy for their own needs, they respire, and in so doing transform high-quality energy, solar for plants and food for consumers, to a less ordered form, heat. Heat transfers out of the system, thus pyramids of productivity for entire ecosystems over a year always show a decrease along the food chain. This diagram of a food chain displays values of net primary productivity for each trophic level. Net primary productivity forms the base of the entire food chain. Notice the progressive decline in available energy. Notice the efficiency of transfer, 10%. Efficiency is calculated using output divided by input, 100 as the amount left with the primary consumers, divided by input, 1,000, the amount available to them, and the efficiency is 10%. 10% of the energy at this trophic level remains at this trophic level. 90% has been transformed to heat and is transferred out of the system. The same 10% efficiency is shown for each level up the food chain. While 10% is a general rule for the efficiency of energy transfer, efficiencies can vary depending on the ecosystem or the organisms involved. Keep the idea of calculating efficiency in the back of your mind. We'll be coming back to it. Sometimes productivity pyramids are drawn in equilateral triangular shapes. Please avoid drawing productivity pyramids this way. This misrepresents or underestimates the actual decline of energy through the food chain. Respiration results in large amounts of energy being dissipated as heat, increasing the entropy of the ecosystem. In my last slide, I suggested that with energy flow from one trophic level to the next, 90% of the available energy is transformed to heat, leaving only 10% as net production. This equilateral triangle does not display that. But this diagram does nicely display the concept that some of the energy from each trophic level goes to the decomposers. It's important for you to realize that the system is more complex than just producers and primary consumers and secondary consumers. Notice that even the decomposers transform some of the high-quality food energy to heat. Ecological pyramids model the functioning of an ecosystem because the decline in available energy through the food chain has implications for the species at each trophic level, and it has implications for humans as we harvest food from different trophic levels. Stay tuned. In this productivity pyramid, you can see the producers, primary consumers, second consumers, and third level consumers. The author placed the decomposers here, R for reducer, decomposer. I appreciate the attempt to model a more complete system by adding the decomposers into the pyramid. Remember that organic matter from all trophic levels will be transferred to the decomposers. The numerical values given are rate units in kcals per meter square per year. The implications of the progressive decline in available energy are, first, that there's a limit to the number of trophic levels that a system can maintain, 4 or 5 levels maximum. Secondly, top consumers will be more rare due to the less available energy. The rarity of top carnivores makes them vulnerable to changes in the environment. The implications of the second law of thermodynamics for food chains is a progressive decline in available energy through the food chain. Thus, food chains are limited to 4 or 5 trophic levels. Top carnivores are rare, and rarity makes such species vulnerable. Top carnivores are dependent on all of the trophic levels below. If one trophic level fails, this could have serious consequences for the top carnivores. Rarity also makes random catastrophic events more likely to impact the population. Rarity means that the genetic diversity is less. Rarity means that they might be more valuable to poachers, and that also their rarity could attract more tourist dollars for social systems. In this diagram, we have two scenarios where humans feed as primary consumers or humans feed as secondary consumers. The magnitude of the rate of energy storage is represented by the green, the brown, and the blue bars. And due to the second law of thermodynamics, the quantity of energy available at this trophic level is less than the quantity available here, which is less than at the producer level. Thus, I will attempt to answer these questions. If humans were to feed as primary consumers, vegetarians, there would be more energy available than if we were to feed as secondary consumers. And that's because we've passed the corn through the cow first before getting to the people. More food would be available to humans if we fed lower on the food chain rather than higher on the food chain. Unlike other species, humans can make choices about how they eat and what might be best for the food supply and the environment and the society in which they live. As I've mentioned previously, net primary productivity forms the base of an entire food web, and as you can see in this table, values for NPP vary across ecosystems. Equatorial rainforests, by way of example, have high NPP values because of warm temperatures, high rainfall, and high insolation, sunlight. Tundra biomes have low NPP values because of low average temperatures and low insolation, sunlight. Deserts also have low NPP values because of the lack of rainfall. Notice that reefs, like equatorial rainforests, have high NPP values, warm temperatures of the tropics, and high insolation in shallow water drives net primary production to high levels. Let's move on to other ecological pyramids, and here we will pick up pyramids of biomass, pyramids that display the quantity of organic material, usually given as dry mass, for each trophic level along a food chain. Remember that pyramids of biomass represent instantaneous measures of biomass, that the pyramid storages are exactly that, storages of a standing crop at any given moment. The units are not rates, but instead are grams per meter square, or could be joules per meter square. The biomass pyramid from a forest in Panama displays a decrease in biomass through the food chain. This is in accordance with the second law of thermodynamics. But we have an IB syllabus statement that digs into some of the complexity of biomass pyramids, and here it is. Explain how pyramids of biomass can show greater quantities of biomass at higher trophic levels. Well, that's strange given the second law of thermodynamics. How can that be? Well, part of the explanation results from the fact that biomass pyramids display a standing stock, in other words, an instantaneous fixed point in time measurement for each trophic level. Secondly, seasonal change in the environment can cause the inverted biomass pyramid, and I'll explain. Let's take a look at an inverted biomass pyramid. This pyramid, a biomass pyramid, comes from ocean or lake. Lake or ocean systems are the only systems in which biomass pyramids might be inverted, as can be seen here, displaying greater quantities of biomass at higher trophic levels. Also keep in mind that this effect is a seasonal one, winter mostly, when productivity levels are generally lower, but don't let that be your full explanation for the apparent conflict with the second law of thermodynamics. A pyramid like this should have you thinking, how is the system sustained energetically? How could there be less mass of producer than consumer? Well, there can be, as this biomass pyramid shows, and it's because, one, biomass pyramids represent standing crop values, instantaneous measurements at any one moment in time. The producers in this lake or ocean ecosystem are very small, and they reproduce very quickly. The high reproductive rate is often called high turnover. Thus, over a 24-hour period of time, the phytoplankton, the single-celled organisms in the lake or ocean, are reproducing at high rates. They're typically very small. Their high rate of reproduction over 24 hours provides sufficient energy to support a higher mass of zooplankton at any one moment in time. In other words, the explanation has to do with the fact that productivity is measured over time, rate units, while biomass is an instantaneous measurement of a standing crop. In the summer months, when productivity levels are generally higher, the biomass pyramid for the same lake or ocean system would appear like this, displaying the general tendency for a decline in biomass along the food chain. That's because of the second law of thermodynamics. Here's a professionally produced ecological pyramid with numerical values and units. Notice the 10% efficiency relationship from one trophic level to the next to the next. And I ask, is this a productivity pyramid or a biomass pyramid? The units are joules, an energy unit, but that alone doesn't mean that the pyramid is a productivity pyramid, because we can represent biomass pyramids in gram per meter square units or joule per meter square units. Given that the units are not rates and are given simply as joules, I might argue that this is a biomass pyramid. I'm not sure that this was the intent of the authors, who also neglected to give area units, but if this pyramid were to be a productivity pyramid, the units must be in rate terms. Pyramids of numbers are the last of the ecological pyramids that model food chains and webs. In this pyramid of numbers, we can see the general tendency of numbers to decline through the food chain. This is in accordance with the second law of thermodynamics. Notice that the units of numbers pyramids is numbers, a count of individuals at each trophic level. Here is a marine pyramid of numbers. Remember to avoid drawing any pyramid as an equilateral triangle. Use the stepped pyramid to accurately represent what's going on, which is the underlying decline in available energy through the system due to the second law of thermodynamics. And like biomass pyramids, numbers pyramids can also be inverted. Here's the IB syllabus statement. Explain how pyramids of numbers can display different patterns, including inverted pyramids. Hint, the explanation should reference the relative size of organisms at particular trophic levels. Here is a numbers pyramid of a temperate forest in the summer. Number of individuals per square meter are given. Notice the relatively small number of producers relative to primary consumers. Again, the obvious question should be raised, how is this relationship sustained energetically given the second law of thermodynamics? Now, the explanation is that the producers are huge relative to the primary consumers. The large size of producers, think large trees here, results in sufficient energy production to sustain relatively smaller but more numerous primary consumers. In this slide, we have two ecological pyramids for the same temperate forest. On the left is a productivity pyramid shaped the way all productivity pyramids are, always displaying a decline in available energy through the food chain. Be careful, remember, be careful to avoid constructing pyramids as equilateral triangles. Use the stepped display for your pyramids. On the right, we have a numbers pyramid for the same forest. You can see that large trees would be represented as a small number of individuals. Thus, numbers pyramids can display inversions because of the differences in the size of organisms at specific trophic levels. So here's a chance to practice your understanding of numbers pyramids. Aphids, plant lice, are small insects that feed in very large numbers on one certain plant. Other insects, known as ladybirds, prey upon the aphids. Which of the following numbers pyramids best describes the food chain? You can turn the movie off now or follow along with me. Pyramid C is correct, even though not much information is given. The large numbers of aphids feed on one plant, and ladybirds, the predator, larger than aphids and less numerous, feed on the aphids. Here's another chance to practice your understanding of numbers pyramids. Trees, sap-sucking insects, carnivorous insects, birds, and bird parasites comprise a food chain in a woodland. Which of the following numbers pyramids best describes the food chain? You can turn the movie off now or follow along with me. Pyramid B is correct. A few number of trees supports the trophic level above. A very large number of small parasites feed from the larger organisms in the trophic level below. As we approach the end of this movie, There are 3 related IB syllabus statements that are important and appropriate to the focus of this movie. Define bioaccumulation, define biomagnification, and explain the accumulation of toxins such as DDT or mercury along food chains. The reason that bioaccumulation and biomagnification are appropriately placed in this movie is that biomagnification is often represented in pyramid form. Pay close attention as we move through the last remaining slides. Toxins or pollutants that are not biodegradable, are not broken down by the metabolism of organisms, can accumulate in the bodies of individual organisms at particular trophic levels, seen here. Then, as one trophic level feeds on another, as one trophic level feeds on another, and a trophic level feeds on another, the toxins magnify in concentration. They increase in concentration through the food chain because fish eat many zooplankton and predatory birds eat many fish. The most important concept in understanding both bioaccumulation and biomagnification is that the toxin, DDT or mercury, PCBs or other, is not degraded by the body, not excreted by the body. The toxin is stored within the body of individual organisms, and it accumulates. It accumulates in individual organisms. Then, as it will be with food chains, the toxin increases in concentration up the food chain. The toxin is magnified. As a result of this, the adverse effects of the toxin are often seen first at the top of the food chain, where the concentration of the toxin is highest in the tissues of the organism. This diagram displays how the concentration of the toxin, DDT or mercury, PCBs or others, has magnified to the top of the food chain. Ultimately, the adverse effects of the magnification of the toxin is first seen in the top carnivores as their population numbers decline. The impact of the toxin can take many forms. The introduction of DDT as an insecticide on agricultural fields in 1945 is correlated with a decrease in eggshell thickness in predatory birds. The thinner shells meant that roosting females would cause shells to break. The thinner shell reduced successful reproduction. Falcon populations declined. Similar data was gathered for other predatory birds such as the sparrowhawk. You can see that when DDT was introduced, the eggshell thickness was far less than prior to the introduction of DDT. Mercury, an industrial pollutant often discarded into the waterways of the world, also magnifies up the food chain. Mercury accumulates in the individual bodies of organisms and then magnifies up the chain, and people preferring to eat high on aquatic food chains eat the tuna and become exposed to high levels of mercury as well. Mercury can affect human health in many ways. Again, human preference for tuna particularly, a large animal high on the aquatic food chain, puts people at risk of mercury poisoning. Mercury poisoning in humans primarily affects the nervous system, particularly for a growing fetus. Adults can suffer mercury poisoning as well, displaying symptoms of fatigue, difficulty with breathing, difficulty with vision. High levels of mercury could cause kidney failure. So with this last slide of a productivity pyramid, I ask, define GPP, NPP, GSP, and NSP. Explain the color distinctions on this diagram. See me in class if you are unsure of any of the questions I've asked on this slide. And that brings us to the end of IBESS Ecosystems and Ecology 1, Part 3.